Hi guys and welcome back. So we just finished installing and setting up our Laravel project, and we have a brand fresh new Laravel project on our VS Code loaded, and we're going to be looking at the folder structure to see what each of these files and folders mean. Previously, that is from Laravel 10 and below, it had a different structure, and a Laravel 11 introduced what is called a skeleton structure. So you may be seeing a different folder structure, a little different from what you may see in Laravel 10. So if you're setting up Laravel 10, the folder structure may be different, but most of the things will still remain the same. So Laravel 11 has made it a skeleton structure in a way that it has kept aside or kept hidden some things that are not so important for starters. So we dive straight into it. We see that we have a lot of folders, like 8 folders here. We have app, bootstrap, config, and quite a couple of others. Our focus right now is going to be on app, it's going to be on databases, config, resources, and routes. It doesn't mean that the other folders are not important, but as time goes on, as you learn Laravel better, you will be able to understand some of these folders. Now, remember we talked about the MVC, right? The MVC, Model View Controller. So we want to start looking at our folder structure based on that approach of Model View Controller. And the model, like we said, was what is relating between the application and the database. And if you open the first application, right, the first folder, which is app folder, this is like the core of your application. It has everything that has to do with the logic of your application. Now, you see that there's a folder called models, right? Models, you have a user.php file. So this is the file that has to do with interaction with your database. So every model is going to be stored here. So when you want to interact with your database for a particular table, you're going to create a file for that. So this user table, this user.php file interacts with the user's table. Now, we talked about MVC, right? Model View Controller. Let's go to the controller. All of the controllers are found inside HTTP controller. Everything around controller is found inside this folder, right? Inside the folder controller, you have the controller. So the M and the C are found inside app. So you have app controllers for controller, and then you have app models for models. For providers, you don't have to bother about this so much. You will see how it comes handy subsequently. We go to config. Config now is where you're doing configuration of your application, things like application settings. So you want to see maybe your application, what is the name of your application? Maybe what is your environment? Are you in the development or production environment? Are you in debug or production setting, the app URL, time zone, and a whole lot of others? You can also see configurations as regards authentication, caching, database, file system, login, and a host of others. So we move away from the config folder to the database folder. This is a very important folder also to note. And in this folder, you're going to be able to see that you have a database.sql, SQLite. This is your SQLite database for those that are familiar, but where we are focused now is on migration. So Laravel brings a pattern where you can use PHP to create MySQL database tables and alter them. So everything about you creating your database is found inside your migration. And when you want to seed, or when you want to insert dummy data, maybe you want to test your project or so, you can create all of your dummy data inside seeders. Don't worry, you're going to see all of this in this course of the tutorial. Then we go to public. Public, as it says, is the public folder where you have everything such as your JavaScript file, your CSS file, your images, your assets, everything that has to do with a public asset, such that users can access it without necessarily going to the application. Then we have resources. Now, remember we talked about MVC, the view. The view is found inside resources views, right? Resources views. This is where you see all of your HTML files. So if you open something like welcome.blade, you see that welcome.blade is all HTML. well, it's HTML blade file. So this is where you're going to write the representation layer, how the application is going to look and feel is going to be found inside here. Then we'll go to routes. Routes is where we talked about a traffic police, right? So when you hit the / URI / what should happen? It was going to unload you this view. We're going to look at this also as time goes on. So your view, your route, everything about your routing of your application is found inside this routes folder. Storage is where you keep all your storage information. Tests, when we will be writing tests like unit tests and feature tests, we're going to be focusing on this folder. So this folder, the tests folder, takes all of our unit and feature tests. And lastly, we have the vendors folder. So this is where when you do Composer require or Composer install, all of the packages that help Laravel to run successfully are saved inside the vendors folder. Then you have .env. .env is a file that you use to configure environment settings. For example, your application name, for example, your database configuration, your database name, the connection type, the session driver, if you're doing broadcasts, if you're using Redis, mails, you can configure mails here, and access tokens to stuff like AWS and other external third-party packages. Then you have .env.example, a similar file. This is one that you use to create your .env. Then Artisan is the command line tool that you're going to be using a lot to do creating stuff on Laravel. And the other files follow. For now, these are the most important files and folders which you will need to know. Just for us to have a summary, you have the app folder, which has the application functions, which will include the model and the controller. You have config, which is all of your configurations. You have databases where you can actually create your database through migrations. You have public, where you have all the public related files such as CSS, JavaScript, images, favicons, and all of that. You have resources, views, where you have your views, that is your HTML files of your application. And then you have the routes, which is where you put the structure of your routes, how your application is going to run with the routes. So on the next episode of this tutorial, we're going to start looking at some hard coding and some coding stuff. Before we go, I just want to say you can actually come here to the Laravel documentation, and if you go to directory structure, once you go to directory structure, you have everything explained clearly. Also, you have the app bootstrap config, so you can read more about the directory structure here on the Laravel documentation, so you can get more context about what each file and each folder means. See you in the next tutorial.